Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Event Industry News podcast. Today, I am joined by Ashanti Bentil-Dhue, an equality and inclusion expert. Ashanti, along with Gabrielle Austen Browne, have recently launched Diversity Ally, a consultancy service and membership organisation which aims to help events, MICE and hospitality businesses become more diverse and inclusive. Ashanti, welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. We've chatted in the past, and I think this is definitely something that's on everybody's radar right now, right? And it should be. And I wanted to take the opportunity to talk to you, to educate myself a little bit better, absolutely. Yeah. And I think most of our readers and listeners are also trying to do that at the moment. But before we jump into Diversity Ally and why you launched that with Gabrielle, can you just give us a little bit about your background? Because you don't just do this, right, in the events industry.
Yeah.
You do other things. So how did you get started in events and how does that look?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And thank you for, even giving the space on your platform to talk to us. So my background is I did the traditional conventional thing and went to university and had a career in law and finance.
Okay.
And one day I went on holiday to Barbados, and I just had a moment where I thought, right, now is the time for me to do something I've always wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I love, obviously, kind of hotel culture, bringing people together, and Barbados, obviously, that was all around me. Yeah. And so when I came back to London, I decided to resign from my banking job. And I started building an online community. And the way to do that was by doing events. And so I used to bring people together from all over the world. It was in a community that was about women in the food industry.
Cool. Yeah.
And so that's what I did. Now, the trouble with that is that I enjoyed the bringing the people together part, but I didn't really understand or grasp how to monetize that. Yeah. So basically I ran out of my savings pretty quickly. But the thing that stayed was the online events element, because that was the cheapest, actually free way of marketing what I did. And then eventually people just kept asking me, how did you build this community using online tools? And that's when EventMind, which is my main bread and butter business, was born. And so EventMind, as you see it today, is an evolution really of that online community. And so I started running events for other people as part of their marketing using just digital and virtual tools. And then we really started digging deeper into the virtual event space. So that's how I came to be a supplier, essentially, in the events industry.
So you were like super early. Everybody that thinks like virtual events are something new since the coronavirus and the pandemic, and we're recording in July, so we kind of still are in the midst of it. Yeah. You guys were right there. In fact, sounds to me like you were quite a pioneer at the time of using technology to do online events.
Absolutely. And I think obviously in those days you used things like Facebook, you used YouTube, you used free social media platforms as a way to connect people on live stream. I remember when live streaming really became a thing on Facebook, and we dug deep and used it, and we used to get great interaction, engagement, and lots of clients. And so and back then I used to talk about Love Island, for example, as this kind of virtual event, and people used to think I was crazy. But now when you look at Love Island, the way ITV really plan and run that show, that is literally I guess it's a hybrid, right? Because it's taking place in the villa, but then it's the virtual stuff that really keeps that show alive, if we're honest.
Yep, and I think you're right. I think as an industry, I'm sure lots of people are trying to find the way out. How to monetize an online event is something that is quite alien to most people. They don't understand the metrics, the value of what they're presenting. But I think, right to your point, that as an industry, when we're looking to produce these hybrid or online events, I think looking to TV or content creators on platforms like YouTube, I think that is the way to position it and kind of
absolutely
that's the aspiration, right?
Love it. So we're on the same page, Adam. So and it is about content creation and TV broadcasting. If you can take the best of those things, I think that's how you really start seeing the value, as you said, of virtual and hybrid events, even in B2B spaces where they think this can't be judged up. I'm convinced it can be.
Well, listeners, viewers, there's definitely a part 2 with Ashanti
Yeah.
coming of what do virtual events look like in the future. I can
Yeah.
absolutely see that. So we'll absolutely invite you back as EventMind to talk
Yeah.
about that more in detail. But our listeners
Today.
are here to listen to about Diversity Ally. So what led you to launch Diversity Ally?
It's a great question. So, look, unfortunately, just by default, I'm used to being the only person of color in most rooms that I'm in when it comes to business.
Okay.
And that didn't change when I kind of properly came into the events industry. And it didn't bother me per se because I was used to it. But I did always wonder um, what the barriers were to seeing
Hmm.
more diversity visually anyway, in the events industry, because I knew that there were other people out there, because I was meeting them maybe. And so I didn't understand why they may not have been on speakers panels, or we didn't see them in the top 10 lists or anything like that. And then also what I would say was that I did notice a difference when I engaged sales teams that looked more like everybody else,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And we saw a real difference in the way we were able to generate warm leads and bring people over the line.
Yeah.
And so I started to talk about race more openly on my LinkedIn profile in the events industry,
Hmm.
pre-COVID. And it was just really interesting, the feedback that I was getting.
Yeah.
And then, of course, COVID came along. Then we had the George Floyd incident globally,
Yeah.
and that really accelerated me to think, okay, here's an opportunity to offer something specifically for the events industry. So prior to COVID, the corporations that I'd worked with were not event industry specific.
Yeah.
But I feel right now, and so does my co-founder Gabby, that now is a good time to be of use to the global events industry for the reasons that you and I have discussed, Adam. The events industry is built on the qualities, those tenets of community and collaboration. And
Absolutely.
what we do affects nearly every sector that you can
Hmm.
think of,
Yeah.
right? And so this is the perfect industry to model diversity. And so that's why we decided that we would help the industry to do that by forming Diversity Ally.
That's amazing. And I totally agree with you. I think having something specific for our sector to help support and network, I'm connected to individuals that I know have been working with you on their
Yeah.
own business and their own structure. And I think having a support network, a framework and an organization to work with on goals and challenges and things like that
Yes.
absolutely helps move things along, because without that, like you say, maybe there's things outside of our industry but not
Yes.
necessarily event specific. Are speakers at events something specific? Absolutely. It kind of only represents the events industry. You don't get
Yeah.
that in other sectors, really, do you? So
Yes.
congratulations for launching it. I think it's long overdue.
Thank you.
In terms of a company participating or being a member, then
Yes.
what does the framework look like?
Look like.
What do they achieve? What do they do? How do they move the bar?
Brilliant. So that's a great question. So the first thing that we did is we really looked across the benchmarks, right? So these diversity and inclusion metrics, what are they? And we
Hmm.
benchmarked them globally across what other sectors are doing to work on diversity and inclusion. And then, of course, we created bespoke benchmarks for the events industry, as you say, because it is quite particular. There's a really strong entrepreneurial nature within
Yeah.
the events
Yep.
industry, and we had to take that into account when sharing these benchmarks to support companies to move the needle internally. So, how the main thing that we do at Diversity Ally are two things at the moment. One is we do an independent audit
Okay.
on a company's diversity and inclusion culture. And you'll note that I use the word culture because diversity and inclusion isn't really about rules and regulations, because we
Hmm.
have enough of those in the workplace, right? In the
Yeah.
events industry, we're used to that. Checklists, health and safety, etc., regulations. But diversity and inclusion culture is about the spirit of a company, that unspoken, unsaid atmosphere, environment, and the way we treat people, attitudes, ideas, and beliefs. And it's those things that impact the actual decisions or processes and systems that we put in place. And so what we've done is create a completely deep dive independent audit where we look at an organization's overall diversity and inclusion culture. And that includes things like pay scales, appraisal processes, onboarding, recruitment, internal talent development. So a lot of the time, we're not actually necessarily talking about things like race and gender. We're talking about the culture within. How do you go about bringing people into your company? And what beliefs and ideas and values are you sharing with those employees, and how does that impact the way they treat other people? So that independent audit is really key. That's where you start. That's how you identify where you're at and where you need to get to. That's the first thing. And then secondary to that, what we do is we run workshops. We run workshops for senior leadership and also founding teams, because in the events industry, we have a lot of great companies that still have their original founding team kind of really spearheading the company. And so we do workshops, which we call safe space conversations, where there's no blame, no shame. It's about really getting to the bones of it. Where are you at? What is your understanding of diversity and inclusion? What is your understanding of equity? What is your understanding of how we create healthy workplace cultures? And we do that discreetly, confidentially, with the senior leadership or with the founding team first. And then from those conversations, we're able to assess what the wider employee cohort needs in terms of training and development.
It's really good to hear that you use the term safe spaces, because I think as somebody who's very much in the industry, I myself, you know, there's and any business owner, I think having those conversations, maybe the reluctance there somewhat is because they don't want to put themselves out there in case they get perceived to have it totally wrong, right? Which might be the case, you know. I'm trying to go through a process myself where I kind of get away from some of the or look at some of maybe what my own opinions might be, are they misconceptions, right? Which I'd love to get onto to come onto next. But I think those safe spaces and having that open chat, kind of like when a child grows up and they ask mum and dad those questions, and kind of like they don't have no barriers, they don't have no reluctance to come forward, they just say it how they see it, and you either agree with them or tell them why they might have got it wrong. And I think that's, you know, that kind of setup absolutely makes it a better way to move that bar.
I think, and this is the thing, right? We know that 38% of employers don't feel comfortable talking about race in the workplace, right? All of the research and studies that we've been able to obtain, even the research that we've done to create our white papers, people are not comfortable talking about race anyway, much less in the workplace. And it's really, really one of the biggest barriers to starting to talk about how we can create diversity of that kind in the events industry, which is why the safe space conversations are so crucial, but also tend to be the most impactful. And so it's really, it takes bravery and some courage for senior leaders, people who are very proficient at their jobs, people who are successful in their field, to take a moment out and reflect and think and challenge some of the ideas and beliefs that they might have. And sometimes that is uncomfortable. And as facilitators, our job is not to make it more comfortable. Our job is to help you keep uncovering those so that we can start to just readjust with facts, with data, but also maybe even some of the lived experience of some of your employees that you might be unaware of. And so, yes, they are safe space conversations, but they do require true leadership to get into a space maybe where you are uncomfortable, or maybe you don't know all the answers. And so you're in this space to learn, to listen.
Well, as the events industry, we are used to being uncomfortable, so there should be no problem with any of our leaders or business owners, etc., kind of accepting that, you know, we are an industry that deals with, like you say, issues, safety, you know, challenges, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
I mentioned earlier that I maybe have some of my own misconceptions. Could you share some of what you feel is a misconception around diversity, inclusion. You know, you mentioned there that a lot of people maybe think about race.
Yes.
Are there other things that kind of go along with those misconceptions?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, if we take something like race specifically, I think one of the biggest conceptions we hear is that the best people get the job.
Right. Okay.
Right? So, we'd love to believe that that is true. And that is ideally what it should be. But unfortunately, when we look into the stats and the data and the research, there might be things that we don't understand, that we are unaware of, that change the way we judge or measure someone before we've even hired them, which is why we don't end up hiring them. Okay. Yep. So, there are some well-documented studies about people's names. You asked me how to pronounce my name before this
I did, yeah,
call, right? But the fact is, my name is not usual. And for many people, before they meet me, it might indicate that I am not English.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if you have then certain beliefs about people with names of a certain type, whether they be conscious, habitual, it does impact whether or not you choose to invite them, for example, to even be interviewed.
Yep. Yep.
And then what happens if I turn up at the interview? Okay, I right now wear a head wrap. Part of that, a large part of that is cultural, okay, as well as preference. What beliefs you may or may not have about me because I have turned up to the interview with a head wrap on. Okay, now really for the job that I'm interviewing for, none of that should actually matter. Of course, if I'm interviewing for a job where, I've got to be maybe in a uniform or whatever, that might be slightly different. But generally speaking, none of those things should matter. My name, what I look like, how I chose to, culturally represent myself. But the fact is, these things start to. And so when we say things like the best people get the jobs, then we have to look at, in 2020, across every sector in the UK, at least 98% of those sectors have a predominantly white workforce.
It's really interesting that you mentioned things like names, because names change, right? My wife is Dutch. She had a lovely Dutch name. When she married me, she wanted to take my name. I didn't force her. Actually, I even had the discussion about me taking her name or having a double-barreled name.
Yes.
That changed. So that would then automatically change somebody's perception of her, right?
Absolutely.
And headgear, like I'm wearing a hat now. Like I love a hat. Like I know lots of people that love hats.
Yeah.
And to be fair, fashion something, or whether it's cultural or otherwise, is something that's extremely personal to the person at the time, isn't it? Like we all have our own look, style, the way that we like to present ourselves. So it's really interesting that you suggest that those two things, I can absolutely see that they can alter somebody's way of thinking or perceived thinking. I'm always taught I was always taught never read a book by its cover.
Yeah.
Because the way that the cover looks doesn't necessarily mean that represents the content inside.
Yes.
I guess it's kind of like the same thing, right?
It is. And so that's why there's been lots of experiments done where names are completely removed. And we see different results.
And that shifts the bar, right, then? So that actually ends up with an outcome. So back to your point about the best person gets the job. Well, if the best person can't even get the interview, they're not going to get the job, are they? It's not going to happen.
Exactly.
And is that, again, something how you help companies then become more diverse by saying, right, do this, take all of this information out, I guess, in some ways, and just focus on the core of what that person's doing.
Exactly. It's about reducing the amount of bias that might be there, right? Because we're only human. And certain ideas and beliefs, if they've never been challenged, questioned, or explored, are entrenched. And so they take a bit of time for us to change as individuals. But in the meantime, we can manually try to remove certain elements so that we can start to see more diversity in the types of applicants that we are shortlisting for interview, for example, right? So, and the problem is with this is that the data speaks for itself. Right now in the UK, 1% of senior positions are held by women of colour across every single sector, and it's 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, so the idea that the best people get the job, because when you actually look at the statistics, if you look specifically at women of color, they are among the most educated across the UK labour workforce. Those two things don't correlate.
Yep.
Right? And so we have to start looking at, there are misconceptions that are almost uncontrollable that are in our minds when we recruit.
Brilliant. Ashanti, I want to also just go back a little bit to, there's a really burning question I had right at the beginning when you mentioned about speakers.
Yes.
You know, Event Tech Live has a call for papers. It's wide open, and then we go through a process of shortlisting, but then it goes in front of a review panel, hopefully to ultimately weed out the best content for the show.
Yes.
What's your advice to those listening? Because I would imagine most of our listeners, most of our viewers are involved in somewhat or some form of speaker content-driven events.
Yeah.
What's your advice there? How can we, what's some easy practical stuff that maybe people can do to make sure, A, that they are being inclusive, but if they identify that they're not, that they can do things to
something
change
different.
that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm putting you on the spot there a little bit. I do apologize.
It's okay. So, you know, on a practical level, you know, right now LinkedIn is a buzz with great people who are staying very visible, whether or not they're on furlough or they're still working for their company. Sometimes we just have to make a bit of effort. The same way event organizers make an effort with making sure that the menu has every kind of dietary requirement on it, for example. The same way they go out of their way to find the right decor, a particular kind of flower. You can do that when it comes to diversifying your speaker panels. If you search on LinkedIn, obviously you can't search by race, but if you look on LinkedIn or you go into some of the LinkedIn groups, the Facebook communities that are very healthy, you know, for event professionals, you will find people of different kinds. And we're not just talking about race. You know, you might be looking at disability inclusion. You might be looking at more of a gender spread. You know, they are out there. Now, one of the practical things that Diversity Ally is doing is making sure we have connections to a Black and Brown speaker directory that will make it easier for those who are, you know, planning these content and speaker-driven events to at least consider diversifying that panel. And, you know, I think the real thing here is understanding why it matters.
Yeah.
Right? Because once you understand why it matters and what the benefits are to your event as well, you will make the effort to do it. It's the same way now we don't only have meat, you know, menus. Okay? We now have vegetarian and vegan and gluten-free, etc., etc. Why? Because it means attendees who have those dietary requirements or preferences come along, they enjoy it, they stay, they come again. So the real issue here is, why does it even matter? Well, it's because the audiences and the communities and the clients we serve reflect that diversity that we don't have currently on speaker panels.
That's amazing. I love the idea of the directory to help people. And anybody listening, if you want to engage with Ashanti, we're going
Get
to
in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I did it the same bit. Right, I got introduced to you through Tamar, but I was aware of you on Tamar is from Gleaning. Give her a shout out. We were connected on social media, and that's how that network effect can work, right? If you reach out to the right people, they can put you in touch with the people that you need to speak to.
Absolutely. And I think Tamar is a brilliant example, and I think it's brilliant that you've even brought her up. You know, she is a great example of someone who from the very beginning has, you know, shared, you know, she really has said, hey, go and speak to so-and-so, or have you considered, you know, she has demonstrated what we call allyship. You know, she's seen that need for more diversity in beyond gender, which in itself is a challenge in the events industry when it comes to maybe senior positions with the industry. But she's seen that need, and she's seen where she has a sphere of influence. And therefore she shared and said, hey, this is something that I'm learning about and discovering, have a chat with them as well. She's a very good example of doing what she can in her sphere of influence.
Yeah, and you know, I know Tamar through Event Tech Live and working with her across the industry news, and let's be honest about it, like especially around tech, diversity is something that needs to be spoken about. We have some very diverse companies like Shock Logic,
Yes.
amazing diversity within their
Yeah.
organization, right at the roots of who they are, really.
Yes.
And then others, not to take anything away from them or point fingers, but very much, like you say, white male led, white male makeup, that kind of stuff. And maybe it's something that, again, we can hopefully that they will take a look at and see how they can as well.
I mean, one thing I will say, Adam, is that, look, you can't help who you are. The same way
absolutely.
I can't change the color of my skin. If, you know, you can't change who you are. And I always say that. But what you can do is recognize the power that you have because of what you look like, right? For me, as an able-bodied person, there are advantages that I have. And to deny them would be silly, right? So where I can, as an able-bodied, for example, event supplier, if we're choosing a venue, that's one of the things we talk about at Diversity Ally a lot. You know, does this venue properly accommodate and include disabled visitors? So, but I could think, well, I don't have any. I do as an able-bodied person. That's something I have the luxury of not thinking about. But when we're planning events, we could think, okay, what are the accessibility points here?
Yeah.
How seamless and smooth and discreet can we make this experience for somebody who might be a disabled visitor? And it's that thing, you know, if you are a white male, you do have power and some sphere of influence. So you don't have to feel guilty or bad about that being white. The fact that you may have started a business that is now growing, you know, is flourishing. That's not something to feel bad about at all.
Yeah.
What you can do now is, as you grow your team, you can think about, well, how can we bring more diversity into our employee group? As you do your marketing, how can we demonstrate an inclusive culture in our imagery? That's where you start seeing your sphere of influence and thinking about, okay, what can we do to change the overall narrative?
So from our conversation for the last 25, 30 minutes or so, my takeaways are that we need to talk about it, but more importantly, we need to measure, change, have open conversations, engage with others within our own community, outside of our community, engage with platforms and networks like Diversity Ally, which sounds like a fantastic initiative. And again, I said it at the beginning, it's something that's clearly long overdue within our sector. I guess then my next question for you to kind of bring it all together is, I think with Diversity Ally, if I'm not wrong, there is a code of conduct, right?
Yes.
You may have covered some of it already, but what are the key principles of that code of conduct that I guess anybody can adopt?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So here's the thing. You know, guidance, we believe in supported accountability at Diversity Ally, right? So those benchmarks were created to support companies starting to become more accountable about their kind of internal culture. Now, we cover some main areas when it comes to those benchmarks. The most obvious ones are things like hiring and recruitment. So we look right from the moment you start marketing new posts, for example, to the moment when you bring those candidates through to your onboarding process. So we talk about recruitment and hiring. The next set of benchmarks cover developing talent, because this is the area that sometimes companies become unstuck in, right? That's why we see those statistics that say 92%, 98% of this workforce is predominantly white, because it's in this development of talent stage that we're not looking at the processes and systems that might be disadvantaging certain groups of people. So developing talent. And then the next section is about your culture internally. And then we talk about your partners and suppliers. So I would really suggest that people go onto the website, because there's a totally free and in-depth section that takes you through each of those big areas. And for you as a company, I always say there might be an area that you're okay on right now. So maybe you're okay on your partners and suppliers, but you know you need to work on your internal talent development. That's okay. Just go to that section and start looking through the pointers that we've highlighted that you could start looking at in more detail. And one of the things I really want to share, I guess, as well, Adam, is that doing this work is not a political statement.
Yep.
And I spent a lot of time talking about this because although the George Floyd incident and subsequent Black Lives Matter protesting has definitely gone global, organizational health is not a political statement. No. It's just the right thing to do. And what companies, and I think, as I say, the events industry has taken a real knock, over this COVID period. And if we want to reignite it, if we want to start that economy again, we have to start thinking now about attracting diverse talent and making sure that our current workplaces are happy, healthy places for everyone.
I totally agree with you.
That is the key here. It's not a political statement at all. It's more about how sustainable do you want your company to be? How happy of a place do you want it to be?
Yep.
How happy do you want your employees and your clients to be to work with you? And times are moving. When we think about these younger generations who are coming into the industry, their expectations of their employers and their work life is different. They want to work in value-laden places and places that they see those values being lived, as opposed to just on the wall or on a branded t-shirt, a great coaster, etc. So Diversity Allies help to support the events industry to be a model for this kind of thing. Because whatever happens, the climate that we're in will push every sector towards this place.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it's really interesting that you finish on that point because, like you said previously, we are connected to every business sector, every industry in every part of the world, no matter whether that's Mumbai or New Zealand or the Antarctica. There are events everywhere for every sector, every industry, every niche, and if we can't have it at the grassroots core of our sector, then that will ultimately affect every other sector that we touch. So it's our responsibility to have that at the core of our principles.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Anybody listening to this podcast is obviously going to want to check you out. They're probably going to want to connect up with you and ask their own questions, or check out the Diversity Ally website. I keep getting that wrong. I do apologise.
It's okay.
What's the best place to connect up with you, and what's the website for diversity?
So it's diversityally.co.uk. So come onto the website, contact us through the website, or you can come and find Gabby or I on LinkedIn. We're always hanging out on there as well.
Awesome. Ashanti, thank you very much for taking the time. I'm sure this is not the last time that we're going to have this conversation. I'd very much like to keep up to date with event industry news and you about people that have been included. Maybe we can invite one of your members onto the podcast at a later date to talk about their own journey through it. I think that would give a nice balance and another kind of way to look at it for people.
Brilliant.
Everybody that's listening or watching today, if you've enjoyed today's content, please connect up with Ashanti. Please give it a like and a share. Help this content spread through the sector so that we can all become better at our jobs and a better industry. Ashanti, thank you very much for coming on today. And like I said, we'll get you back for EventMind and talk.
Thank you.
No problem.